And welcome back. Today, 25 years ago, South Africa's constitution was signed into law and lauded the world over as one of the most progressive. Its adoption also heralded a clean break from South Africa's apartheid past. It set out a future promising human rights and dignity for all South Africans. SABC's senior reporter Yolisa Njamela has more on this.
The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa was approved by this court, the Constitutional Court, on the 4th of December 1996. It would take effect a year later, on the 4th of February 1997. This court serves as a protector and ultimate guardian of the Constitution. But before it took effect, the late former President Nelson Mandela signed the Constitution into law in Sharpeville in the Vaal Triangle on the 10th of December 1996. Sharpeville, one of the oldest townships, was chosen as a commemorative gesture in remembrance of the 69 people who had died during a peaceful demonstration. They were demonstrating against the vicious past laws on the 21st of March 1960.
We solemnly honor the pledge we made to ourselves and to the world that South Africa shall redeem herself and thereby widen the frontiers of human freedom.
The Constitution drastically transformed the legal, political, social and economic landscape of the country. At the time, government asserted that the crafting of a vision for a new democratic South Africa reflected in the Constitution was a deliberate choice.
That was a choice the ANC made, to go for constitutional democracy, because parliamentary democracy was proven to be a dictatorship that was used by the apartheid government for various and nefarious activities that led to the perpetuation of prejudices against black people. And the parliament there was no checks and balances. But in a constitutional democracy, there are checks and balances, the executive, the separation of powers, there's parliament, and also there's courts, which just stand as a guard of the constitution to ensure that everyone in society complies with the Constitution.
The esteem the South African Constitution enjoys is largely due to its attempt to give effect to citizens' socio-economic rights. Besides human and political rights, Chapter 2 guarantees the right to housing, healthcare, food, water, and education, amongst others. Lamula says inequality based on past racial discrimination necessitated the need to ensure redress.
The Constitution had to be transformative. It then gave directive to government of the day to put legislations to achieve the socio-economic rights on issues of water, access to land, access to health, access to education. Hence, we have been able to move progressively towards issues of water access, human settlement, and as you are aware, on the land, we have been able to do some work in terms of the Restitution Act and also the redistribution, where we have been able to redistribute about 11% of the land, which is still not enough, but at least something was done.
The land should have been returned into the hands of the rightful owners.
The recent debates around Section 25 of the Constitution have, however, questioned the Constitution's ability to resolve issues such as land inequality. Political parties, such as the Economic Freedom Fighters, have asserted that the clause stands in the way of proper land reform in its insistence that landowners be compensated for expropriated land. The Constitutional Court, as the custodian of the Constitution, ensures that the values and principles contained in the country's apex law are not contravened. Some legal minds say there's been decreasing focus over the years in advancing the material conditions of ordinary people.
The Constitutional Court initially started off with, for instance, TAC, the right to life through the death penalty, antiretroviral medication, the right to housing. It started off very well from that perspective, and that foreshadowed what we thought would be coming for years to come. But what has happened with the Constitutional Court over the last decade, 15 years or so, is that it has weighed into government space. We have been dealing with the motion of no confidence, for instance, for the president. We're dealing with Nkandla. We're dealing with governance failures. And what we're seeing is the Constitutional Court is really weighing very closely, teetering on the edge of keeping the country alive from that perspective, because Parliament is not doing its job.
Despite its imperfections, for many South Africans, the Constitution remains a barricade against the excess of executive power, a beacon of hope towards a better life, and a promise of the upholding of dignity for all citizens. Yolisa Njamela for SABC News in Johannesburg.
And of course, let's talk a little bit more about this as we mark the 25th anniversary of the South African Constitution. And as the country notes this particular milestone, this day also provides society an opportunity to reflect, as well as perhaps increase awareness on the significance of this document. And hailed as one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, to what extent do South Africans actually relate to the Constitution 25 years on after its signing in 1996 in Sharpeville? And, of course, how much does the society relate to Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which is, of course, the Bill of Rights, which is supposed to be the cornerstone of South Africa's democracy, where our values of human dignity, equality and freedom are enshrined? So let's speak now to human rights lawyer Edwin Makwati, who joins us now virtually to have a further discussion about this. Edwin, good morning, and thanks for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and thanks for having me, and thanks to the viewers as well.
I think it's common cause that this Constitution, our Constitution, is held in very high regard the world over. But other than the great reviews on how progressive the South African Constitution is, how much do you think, as South Africans, we know about our Constitution, firstly, and how has the country fared in its implementation?
Thank you for that question, Sakina. First of all, let me start by saying that the Constitution itself, lest people get misled, is only a written letter of the law and does not have any effect. For as long as the values that are enshrined in that same Constitution are imprinted into the hearts of the people who are the custodians of that Constitution, and they culturalize it and make it part of their everyday thinking, that we as the custodians of the Constitution have the duty to ensure that the rights of the people of South Africa are protected, promoted, and at all times respected. But the problem that has happened here is that there is talk about the Constitution which has only been reduced to an academic exercise. And unfortunately, the Constitution has found itself in the hands of some of the most dishonest people in the form of politicians in this country. And if the politicians themselves do not know the duty that they hold vis-a-vis the people with regard to the Constitution, then there's no how the people are going to know that they have certain rights and how to exercise and enjoy those rights. That is the gripe that I have with this talk of the Constitution being progressive, yet the rights of the people not being progressively realized as they should 25 years after the Constitution was promulgated.
Edwin, personally, I always take issue with people's agency being reduced. For me, it's always about how much are we doing? And this is not absolving the leaders of our society or government of any of their responsibility by any stretch of the imagination. But as ordinary citizens of this country, as you pointed out, it's incumbent upon us to breathe life into that Constitution, to make that document come alive and give expression to it. So have we done enough? And why haven't we, if that is the case, to make sure that South Africans actually know and understand this constitution that we, of course, say is the cornerstone that will mold the society? Are we doing enough?
I will not fault the ordinary South African by any means, because I do believe that the South African courts, especially the Constitutional Court and also the lower courts, to some extent, have churned out very progressive jurisprudence as far as the Constitution is concerned. And then the issue becomes whether the decisions of the courts are implemented in good faith. And it always goes back to the same people who are charged with being the custodians of this Constitution. You realize that when we talk about socioeconomic rights, there are cases such as the Grootblom case, for example. There is the issue of the Al-Bashir case that happened in 2015. And we have seen very disappointing outcomes as far as those judgments are concerned, because none of those things that were in the orders of the courts were implemented. And in the end, also impunity that prevails after somebody fails in their constitutional duties. The person that comes in continues to do what the previous person was doing. And I think it would be unfair to criticize the ordinary South African or the civil society because there is so much that they have done in terms of advocacy, in terms of litigation and other strategies in order to realize these rights that are in the Constitution. If the head is rotten, there is nothing that the rest of the body can do to escape the rot.
And this is where I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, because if you will remember, when this Constitution first was signed into law, and we had these little booklets with our South African Constitution that were published in all languages, and they were readily available. You could get them anywhere and everywhere. Everybody had a copy of the Constitution of this country. And the cases that you cite are pretty high level. If we bring this down to the ordinary South African who has a right, as per Chapter 2 of the Constitution in the Bill of Rights, a right to dignity that looks at things like your right to shelter, the right to clean drinking water, for example. And we have communities in this country who don't have that. The right to education, etc., etc. You can basically run through the Bill of Rights. And very often you find that people don't even know that this is an inalienable right that they have. So how do you then make sure that you enforce your rights if you don't even know what your rights are? Hence my question about whether enough is being done on all fronts to ensure that society actually knows their rights so that they can be enforced.
You see, I've been working in the NGO sector for some years now, and I have engaged with communities and engaged with stakeholders in various fields as far as the implementation of government policy are concerned. And as far as the knowledge of the Constitution is concerned, I think South Africans know their rights to a large extent more than other people in the region or elsewhere in Africa. You can see with the number of protests, how people go about to protest and try to vindicate their rights at all costs, sometimes losing their lives in the process of fighting for their rights, sometimes getting intimidated. I'll still posit strongly that I think the problem lies with those that are charged with implementation. Not the people on the ground. Because even if you give me booklets in my own language, but you do not want me to enjoy the things that you've made me to read, it still amounts to nothing. I've spoken many times about the brutality of the state security apparatus, as the squalor that the people in Alexandra, in Soweto, in Orange Farm live in. The fact that protests are seen as a challenge to the state's authority, and those that do protests are brutalized. That is a problem. But maybe I'll agree with you in one aspect as far as the people who do things such as protests, where we've seen people digging trenches across roads in their own neighborhoods. Maybe that's one thing that they need to improve on, to know that you do not destroy your own background, your own backyard in order to vindicate your rights. Go to Luthuli House or go to the president's house and block the road to his house so that you will know that he has to do certain things that he's not doing at the moment. But if you destroy your own road or your own Rea Vaya station, I don't know what you hope to achieve. Maybe in that aspect, I'll have a bit of a bone to chew with those people who are trying to vindicate their rights, but otherwise, no.
So often we hear this refrain that with rights come responsibility. How has our society actually balanced this act?
Exactly what I just referred to now in the previous answer, Sakina. Let's for example look at this. South Africa is bordering sometimes, I think, on the peripheries of lawlessness, where you find that nobody now knows how to exercise their right to protest without being violent or destroying property. And then in the process, they delegitimize the protest action that they so rightly deserve to exercise. People no longer stop at traffic lights, and people just can beat up the police or something of that sort. That is a problem then, because people do not seem to understand that with rights also comes responsibility. But sometimes this comes out of frustration because you have been fighting for 25 years or since the advent of democracy. You have seen the same things that the government of today is doing, being done by the apartheid government. So you try to employ the same tactics that the freedom fighters and those that were protesting during the apartheid era have employed in order to make sure that the government at least moves, unite them in the right direction with a bit of force. And protests by their very nature tend to be aimed at destabilizing the status quo and making those that are in power to notice.
So to that point, some would argue that human rights violations have actually heightened with time. You look at what happened in the country in July, and some would say that it starts right from the level of government, where you have public officials who feel entitled to public funds. There's corruption with impunity, police, members of the defense force killing civilians. Do the people tasked with the implementation of these values actually understand its importance, do you think, Edwin?
No, there's totally a decay in rot in the entire society. If you look at, especially with those that are charged with implementation, I'm talking about the police, members of parliament, those that run the metros. The corruption is on levels never before seen anywhere within the governance of South Africa, at least as far as documentation is concerned. I don't know what the problem might be, but it could be that some of the people that are in government got in when they were very hungry, or they are not sure of what's going to happen in the next 5 years, so they tend to want to gather as much as possible quickly. Because you report corruption to an anti-corruption entity, then the corruption fighting body gets bribed not to fight the corruption. It doesn't make sense. Everything is just all over the place. So I think we need to get to a point where those people that violate the rights of the people, either through rampant corruption, are taken to task. And impunity has to fall if there's anything that has to fall. I've heard this term so many times over the years of people having to fall and all that. But when people fall, those that come in and do exactly the same thing. So it's more about now having effective and practical results rather than establishing these useless bodies or increasing police and soldiers on the street, yet without solving the deeper problems that underlie the society. In terms of, let's say, for example, creating employment, making sure that you bridge the inequality gap that is so huge in South Africa, and think you can solve that by hiring more police officers whom you don't pay well, and they end up becoming criminals because they want to make ends meet on their meager payment. So I think there are too many underlying factors that South African society has to deal with, especially at the level of governance.
And the way we relate to each other as South Africans, the Constitution, of course, talks about values of empathy, but even amongst ourselves as citizens, you look at issues like gender-based violence in South Africa, other serious crimes, the brutal murders that we actually witness in this country, and that is reported on even by the police minister, as reported a couple of weeks ago. What went wrong in this land of promise?
South Africa's current situation in all facets, whether politically or economically or socially, has its roots very much in its apartheid past. And I think one thing that was missed there was to reverse all the harm that was done by apartheid. It is more of what I call generational trauma, or what expressed in the psychosocial field we call generational trauma, which was not addressed. But, you find a house with cracks and you think you can just put some cement on the cracks without going underneath to do the real structural work. And in the process, when the paint starts to dry, the cracks begin to show again. It's not that South Africans are genetically violent people or they have something wrong in their mental makeup, but it's the history of apartheid that took so much from the personality and the conscience of the people of South Africa. That has not been addressed. And it's something that cannot be wished away, because otherwise we're going to be talking about it for years. The violence is not going to stop. In fact, it's increasing. Gender-based violence is still increasing. It's actually at epic levels, frightening and skyrocketing at all levels. So we need to get to the bottom of the matters and say we give ourselves so much time, plan strategically how we're going to deal with this rotten society that is made our society not to be one that is desirable to look at present, even though we have achieved one thing, which is a constitution and being able to mingle between the races. I think that was not the main thing, to have people mingling in the streets and having no white and black streets and that. It was to achieve human dignity, equality and freedoms, and that has not been achieved at this rate.
Edwin, we have to leave it there, unfortunately, but thanks so much for your time. Human rights lawyer Edwin Makwati on the Constitution as South Africa commemorates 25 years of the document's existence. And, just to pick up on a point that Edwin makes there about our very violent, divisive past under apartheid. And one has to acknowledge that. We can't get away from that. But 25 years after this constitution was signed, at what time do we start moving along? Please, in our question of the